I'm I've been working very closely with Harrison at S3 and Real Staffing, and obviously Steve Riley at the University of Cambridge. And we're delighted to have you join our webinar and for us to host you. The topic of today is embracing change in HE, higher education, as a consequence of COVID-19. This is a rerun of a webinar that we did in December last year, and we had some fantastic feedback on the topic. And actually, we were unable to finish the webinar, especially the content that we had, because it's very rich. And we agreed very quickly to repeat it because of that feedback. Just some housekeeping rules. You will be on mute, and obviously we'll appreciate you have your cameras off just to save bandwidth. We're doing two things. We're also recording the session, and there's two reasons for that. One, to help us improve our presentations for the future. And secondly, if there are people who are unable to join, we'll put up the video recording up on the LinkedIn invite channel, so people can see the webinar and the presentation for the future. So let's just go into what are the topics that we're going to cover. So we're going to do some introductions. And there's still some people coming in, so I'm omitting people at the same time. We're going to do some introductions. I'm going to set some context around HE, and I think we've got a very HE-rich audience as well. So I'm just going to describe what the sector is about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 and some of the things that are happening in HE at the moment, and especially the trends around digital transformation, and some of the challenges and opportunities that COVID-19 has given us, and how can HE institutions respond to them. And I'll be drawing Steve into that conversation as well. And then we've got some of our thoughts and our experience. We're going to be sharing that through our experience around making change happen. And we've got some interactive polls as well for you to provide us feedback on, and answering some questions that will hopefully entice questions. And also we'll be talking about organizational traits and some models, and we'll give you some of our final thoughts. What we'd also ask you all to do is, if you do have any burning questions, please do post them up in the Q&A, in the chat function in Zoom. And you should see that in the bottom, I think it's bottom right or left. And Harrison is going to capture those. If we can't answer the question as we go through the presentation, we will absolutely do that in the Q&A section towards the end of the presentation. We've got plenty of time. And I think your inputs are really valuable, because they will form those inputs will form some of the things that we would like to talk about in the future, based on the challenges that we see, particularly in the HE sector. Okay, so just some introductions. Over to Harrison. Can you hear us? Can you?
Yeah,
on mute. Okay.
All good. Thank you very much. Cheers, Kuldip. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming along. My name's Harrison Southworth Knights. I'm a recruitment consultant here at Real Staffing. So just to give you a bit of background on us, we've been recruiting into the higher education sector for over a decade now. We're working with 90% of the universities across the UK and Ireland, with some of our biggest clients named in front of yourself. So like University of Manchester, University of Kent, LSE, Exeter, Sheffield, Portsmouth, and these are all just to name a few as well. We have a team of 19 market specialist consultants, which has grown due to our recent merger at the beginning of the year with our sister brand, Computer Futures. We're still covering the same areas, though, of student systems and VLE, IT infrastructure, project management and business change, academic services, HR, finance and payroll systems, as well as marketing, digital, web development, and BI and data warehousing. So with each of them markets, we will have a pool of interims that are readily available to create an impact with any organization that they join. And now within their markets, as mentioned, I look after the project management and business change, where the roles for me that I typically recruit for are IT directors, program and project managers, continuous improvement managers, BAs, change managers and agents, and also PMO managers. Now, to give some facts about us, we are registered on the G Cloud and Crown Commercial Supplier Framework. We're also an official member of UCISA. Our team did attend annual references, but unfortunately haven't been so fortunate last year, probably not for this year either. And as a team, we've also placed over 1,000 contractors into universities, colleges, and education partners across the UK and Ireland. Now, with myself personally, a lot of my success on the team comes from my relationship maintenance, whether that be new or existing clients. The proven for this is 80% of my placements last year were due to repeated business. I look to ensure regular updates within market movements, checking in on my current contractors as much as I can, and providing insight wherever necessary, even if it's checking on your weekend plans, which hopefully from next week we may be able to have a bit further of a discussion about. So if there's any questions relating to any of the above, feel free to contact me afterwards. My details will be on the slide at the end, and I'll be welcome to any of your questions. So now, thank you very much. I'd like to hand over to Kuldip and Steve.
Thank you, Harrison, for that. Just a little bit about me. As you can see my career history there. I've worked in public and private sector. I worked in a lot of other sectors as well, defence to finance. I've worked in management consultancy, working for some large organisations such as TCS. I led the PwC CIO advisory services as well, and I've also built my own boutique brand, which is Innovative Quality Solutions. And under that brand, I'll provide consultancy service, but also interim services. And as you can see, there's three interim roles there that I've satisfied, but there's others as well. My HE experience covers a number of universities. I started at HE around 2013. I worked at the University of London International Academy, helped them with their business and digital strategy. More recently, I did some work as an IT director at University of Cambridge. I helped develop the IT strategy at Durham University, and more recently, I've done some work at University of Manchester as well. And I completed my latest interim assignment as head of technology at the Excel Convention Centre, which was turned into the Nightingale Hospital last April, which is a fascinating experience. But really what I try to do is solve digital and IT problems, and I get the transforming the IT function and aligning it to the business needs, which tend to be all about how can we bring about building a digital enterprise. And hopefully, with my experience, you feel I'm qualified to be able to present this to you today. But enough about me. Over to you, Steve.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm speaking to you from a nice, what you might consider to be a spring day in Cambridge, which has made a bit of a change from the wet weather we've been having. So I've been involved in government IT for 40 years, and before I before joining Cambridge, I was finished up as acting CIO in the Department of Work and Pensions, and for the last 5 years I've been at Cambridge University, where I'm the IT Chief Operating Officer. I have been involved in a large number of welfare reform programs, large numbers of business change over the years, and I'm really glad to be talking to people this afternoon. As Kuldip mentioned before, the one that we ran last December got a lot of interest, and I'm happy to do that. Just to
we're absolutely
on the table.
We're honoured to have you, Steve, especially share your wisdom and your thoughts about change, which we will get on to. So let's kick off. I've just put a few slides together just to provide some context around UK HE. Just as you can see on here, 2/3 of UK higher education institutes have incomes over 100 million. Over a quarter of those institutions, and there's something like 120 odd universities, HE universities, they have 20,000 students. So these are big, large, federated institutions where there's a lot of legacy IT, there's a need to engage a whole plethora of stakeholders, from undergraduates to postgraduates to staff, professional services staff, and not forgetting, the academics and the lecturers who are specialists in their own field. Some of the other facts is that if you put together the net turnover of the legal sector and marketing sectors, they don't. The university sector turnover is greater than those two combined. A lot of the revenue that universities used to get from the government has disappeared, and really the income now is generated from student fees, be they undergraduate or postgraduate, be they UK students, and more recently over the last few years, universities in the UK have been expanding out internationally to attract students from overseas. Obviously, there's been an impact on that from COVID, and especially in Brexit as well. And the other thing to just kind of highlight is that universities are a lot of especially the Russell Group universities, are really research intensive, and they really contribute to the economy of the UK economy and its GDP, developing new products, new services, and really bringing about innovation. And we've seen that recently with the vaccines. If you think of Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Imperial been working away, and there are other universities in Southampton and so forth who are working away on these vaccines and helping us recover from the pandemic that we've been dealing with over the last sort of year or so. And a little statement at the bottom is that we should be looking after our universities. They are the educators of our leaders of the future, and we shouldn't fail them. A few more data points. I'm very rich in my data points, and I wanted to share a couple here. There's the graph on the left shows some information I gathered from HESA, and what that was showing is that the universities are in some, not all of them, but they've been in troubled times financially. As you can see, over the last 4 or 5 years, the number of universities who are suffering from a financial perspective has quadrupled over 4 years. But with that said, and I think I know at least 5 universities who are on the watch list from the OFS in that arena. But the demand for higher education continues. If you can see the report from Angel Calderon there on the right-hand side, that by 2030, there's going to be a 50% gap still to fill in the next 10 years. That's the demand for HE student population increase. So that's a significant demand that the sector is going to have to cope with locally and internationally. And there's a little quote at the bottom there from David Maguire, who's a interim principal and vice chancellor of University of Dundee. He said that the pandemic has really forced universities, and particularly theirs, to drive their digital strategy and get it implemented within 6 months. And that's a significant statement and an important one for us to embrace, because I think digital transformation is absolutely paramount and important for universities to be embracing, and have been embracing, and in some shape and form. So a little bit more data before we get into some of the polls and some open up a discussion with Steve. I wanted to show some data points I captured from Gartner, and here's just 2 graphs that show what's happening with spend on the left-hand side, and you can see on the right-hand side. Gartner pulled out 260 data points here that show that COVID has actually accelerated digital business initiatives and has forced not just in HE institutions but other sectors to really think about what are the operational needs of their organization from a digital perspective. And in some cases, some sectors who have been suffering are really thinking about how they can use digital, not just to grow, but to actually reduce costs as well. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's the spend in IT and technology, M&A, corporate restructuring, product development, R&D is on the increase. The caveat I would put is there are a number of sectors like the hospitality sector and events and so forth have been significantly suffering from the pandemic, but certainly in other sectors, moving to online services, doing digital assessments, to doing digital, turning lectures into online and digital has been a significant achievement for many HE organisations since April last year. So I thought I'd pull together some 4 or 5 areas that I think are challenges and I suppose opportunities for HE organisation institutions, and I'll sort of bring Steve into this discussion as we go along. So the first area is as the pandemic's hit, we've really had revenue challenges and cohort challenges. In students were told to go home or go abroad, back home abroad, and that's impacted revenue. And so the opportunity there is we really need to be thinking about how can we strengthen our existing propositions? What are those academic courses that we really need to enhance or differentiate ourselves on? And maybe thinking about new types of programs. So thinking about business school programs that can be done at a distance learning perspective, and maybe thinking about diversifying the customer base and thinking about where we can attract students where countries haven't been hit by COVID as badly as maybe some of the European or the Western world, I would say. And I know, for example, Vietnam is a country where there's a high number of undergraduates and 18-year-olds who, and a country where they've really done well in combating COVID-19, and maybe thinking about how we track students from that geography, for example. Second area is around thinking about cost optimization and thinking what are those non-essential buckets of cost and how can we reduce them while maintaining quality and delivery of education to student cohorts. And you can differentiate that through digital solutions, but there are a lot of CFOs that I've been talking to have been looking at how they can eliminate non-core spend. So maybe focusing initially on the operations side, making sure business continuity and the underlying plans and support mechanisms are in place to make sure people are able to work remotely, ensuring that their continuity of education services were maintained, and students who were less well off had equipment so that they could have a laptop and they're able to move on to Teams or Zooms or Google Meets. That was the need of the hour as the pandemic hit. But then thinking about, well, what in the pipeline from kind of CapEx spend do we what can we actually eliminate? And universities have been going through that process, which then, if that was a kind of operational kind of focus, a lot of universities are now starting to think about what is the longer term challenges as we come out of lockdown 3. And vaccines will has given us the hope that we can return to some normality in the next few months, hopefully, with fingers crossed. What does a university going to look like for the future? Is it going to be bricks and mortars, or is it going to be click and learn? What's that balance between going on site, onto campus, and what can we do remotely, and in terms of educating cohorts? And I think there lies a challenge of thinking more strategically, thinking more around what skills and capabilities does the university need to have, and partnerships with business as well as other institutions and overseas campuses and so forth. What does that look like? And that's, I think, is something that's going to emerge post lockdown 3. And I think in the background, a lot of vice chancellors and pro vice chancellors are thinking about what that will look like and mean for their university. Is it a teaching university? Is it a research university? Is it a bit of both? and what do we need to do on campus, what we don't need to do on campus, and what states do we need, what we don't need. And do we need big lecture theatres, small lecture theatres? Some real practicalities need to be worked through to see what happens in the longer term, and in terms of moving to a blended or hybrid delivery model of education. And I think as I've tried to show with my the data points I showed earlier, the digital agenda is here. It's been bubbling away in the background from a HE perspective, but now I think it's been a catalyst for change. And I think, we really need to be thinking about what are we going to do in terms of as an institution around admissions, lectures, examination. What do we do with graduation? How do we redefine the digital learning pedagogy for students and lecturers so we can deliver synchronous, asynchronous learning methods? And how do we actually focus on deepening the digital engagement for the user or student experience, not just across the university, but really thinking about them at a faculty and department level. It's not about just the student experience at a university level. I think it really needs to be at a faculty and department level, or even at a college level, depending on what type of university you are. And IT have a role to play in that, because I think as we move to remote working, a lot of the interactions or feedback I've had from CIOs is that really IT worked in a very agile way to get people working remotely. So, there's a sense of purpose, there's a sense of drive to get things done quickly, and it was done in a real agile way. And we knew we need to be thinking about working in a more agile delivery way, not just in IT, but across our universities. And finally, my fifth, and I think a very, very key and important area that we need to focus on as we go forward is the health and well-being of not just students, but also staff. And I think the surveys are out there that show the younger ones tend to cope, cope less well with stress. But also we need to be thinking about our staff and thinking about, as we come out of lockdown, what health and well-being initiatives and support can we put in place for students and undergraduates and staff to ensure that they slowly come back to some level of normality, and we can support them. I just want to draw Steve in here. Steve, is any of those resonate with you from the work that you did at Cambridge as the pandemic hit, and what Cambridge are doing at the moment?
Yeah, so if I think about our response in a number of these areas, I think it will sort of help focus our sort of discussion. So I think it's worth saying that we didn't leave in an orderly fashion. We left very quickly, and some of the things we had to look at were around in the digital learning space. We had to look at this whole thing about lecture capture, making lectures and learning available to people online. We were very in the early stages of developing that from a university perspective. I know plenty of places were far more advanced than that, but that was something we needed to accelerate. In terms of student and staff well-being, this whole working from home, one day you were working in the university and the next you were working from home. We are still only scratching the surface about what people really need in terms of IT to support working from home. We deployed a solution, Microsoft Teams, very quickly to people. That was an intention to do it, but it was very sort of quickly accelerated to allow people to start to work and communicate from home. But some of the solutions we've put in have been very temporary solutions, and now we have to think about how we're going to make these things more permanent. In terms of student recruitment at this university, all of the people are interviewed for all the candidates are interviewed for admission, and so we've had to look at that being done digitally as well. So a digital admissions process, being interviewed online, etc., etc. Those are things we've all had to respond to. And as well, in terms of the digital assessment, we've had to respond with our virtual learning environment, so we can do all of our assessments online. And these have been big. I think here in particular, there was a big gap in some places. They may have been more ready for this. But I do think it's important to sort of, be really clear that we weren't ready for this. I don't think anybody was, and therefore when you come back, there'll be quite a lot of mess to clear up before I think we can get back to it. And talking to people, over the last few weeks, I think people think that we'll re-engage as quickly as we disembarked, and I don't think that's likely. I think it's going to take us some real time to bring people back. Physically, we've been telling people that they can come and collect their chairs and desks and other items, and just logistically now bringing those back is going to be a challenge for us. So there's a lot of planning to do around sort of bringing people back. But I resonate with most of those areas in there. Obviously, the cost reduction again is something that we are. We've had to engage in from an IT perspective, and be, we've had a good hearing about our IT investment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Steve. Let me just I thought I'd pull some of this together in a little diagram to say, well, what I think senior leaders within universities need to focus on as they go forward. And I think your input there, Steve, is really great, because that digital assessment is not going to disappear. It'd be at an admissions stage in the student life cycle to being interviewed. I think, Steve, you've mentioned to me before, you created little hubs in the cities, so where students could go to, so they could get online and get interviewed for their place. Yeah. So digital assessments are something I think could become part of the fabric going forward. Digital learning, moving online, using a virtual learning environments, be that Moodle, Blackboard, or other sort of SaaS-based solutions are certainly going to proliferate. I think education tech or ed tech is certainly thriving, because whilst I'm talking about universities and HE, I think if you think about further education, schools and so forth, all students at all ages are working remotely. So, especially in the UK, so in these lockdown periods, and, that technology has really been fundamental to ensure business continuity, in effect, so that children could continue their education learning, and that will continue in some shape or form. And even in our working lives, I think, pre-COVID, there was probably a maybe 80-20 split, or 90-10, 90% in the office, 10% off. That model is going to significantly change. It could be 50-50. And some corporates have decided to get rid of their offices, certainly in central London, because they think they can deliver the services and products they create in virtually. They can do it remotely. And the other areas are, we talked about revenue and managing costs. Student recruitment is still important, in certainly to fill resource gaps for the future, and especially if you want that growth. You've talked about that 50% gap by 2030. Student recruitment is still really important. And I think underpinning technology around CRM and having a really well-oiled admissions function and marketing function is going to be important. Student staff well-being, we've talked about that, and employability. I think there's a generation of students who potentially are going to come out of university and could be unemployed for quite a while, and we need to be thinking about how we get how can we help them to build other skills, particularly digital skills, so they are more employable? We need to support them. Steve, your thoughts on in these 6 areas would be appreciated.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot in, what I referred to previously there, that these things are connected and all need to be thought of together. And the university has now, responded with a COVID recovery plan, and that's got all of those areas in it as a response from the university. These are sort of key areas that we are looking at, some more than others, and that's just by the nature of the institution. So that sort of digital assessment one, the digital learning ones, are places where we have been coming from a slower start than probably other people are, probably better in revenue diversification here, etc. But all of those things really resonate in our plan about people coming back to the new normal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and as we try to build back for better, we need to learn lessons. I think, Steve, and not at a personal level, as a team level, as an organization level, and that's why I wanted to kind of switch tact a little bit, because we called this webinar "Embracing Change" for HE, and we've given that context and some of the things that have happened as an impact of COVID-19. And I have been doing a number of webinars, including the one with you, Steve, and I've been reaching out to people to say, well, what is the biggest impediment for change? And this applies across sectors, but particularly in HE. And here's some survey results that I pushed out in December last year and January. And I was asking people at all different levels in organizations, and this was during a couple of webinars. I said, what are the biggest impediments for change? Because those 6 things we just talked about are interconnected and need to be done in a way that you understand the strategy and the vision, then you kind of operationalize and develop programs and plans. But what people are telling me is that the biggest challenge is there's a lack of a culture of change, or there isn't a digital mindset, and the leadership need to be really embracing that digital world in the future. And just your thoughts around that, Steve, as we move into change management, would be appreciated as I share this next slide. Mm-hmm. So this slide is something that we put together because what I've seen in my experience in transformation is that usually you get a new leader come into an organization, and suddenly everybody is galvanized to bring up. He's galvanizing the organization for change. And if you look at the Big Bang approach, which is the blue line, that's the standard change curve. There's that boost in morale, and suddenly there's new energy. But then T1 is maybe a year in, and suddenly they announce a restructures required, and there could be there's a program that we're going to have to go through with HR consultation, and suddenly the morale starts dropping. Programs and initiatives aren't quite aligned to the vision. There isn't a sense of purpose, and then the new leader suddenly disappears in 2 years later, and that Big Bang approach hasn't quite worked. But what I've seen in many cases is if you go about doing change in an incremental way, i.e. bite-sized of functionality, in a really agile, responsive, iterative way where you're actually engaging with your stakeholders and your customers, and you're getting constant feedback loops. What I've seen is there's usually more buy-in and there's more support, and you go about your business of change, and the morale and the competence and the value and the benefits increase, as shown in that little wiggly line, as I've tried to depict in that graph. Steve, your thoughts, because you've been involved in lots of business change. What's your thoughts?
So I've been involved in a number of these major change initiatives, from government departments breaking into agencies, government departments breaking into different agencies, major outsourcing, and major welfare reform initiatives, and as well as arriving at the university. And I've pondered this for some time about, this thing about people don't like change. I don't see that with people normally, that people don't like change. I think people are changing all the time. They decide to do, they decide to get married, they decide to divorce, they decide to have children, they major changes, buy houses, all of these sorts of things. And these are things that people do without massive big bang change programs. They're sort of things that people get on with. So I've pondered this for some time, and I reflect back when I arrived at Cambridge. People have been talking about change for 2 years, and I thought everybody was suffering from talking about change, and talking about it was already suffering from fatigue before we'd even started from it. So there isn't anything that I've been involved in that I don't think would have benefited, from a more incremental approach to change, a more agile approach to change, where you set yourself a general destination of where you're trying to get to. And then as you go through that change cycle, you do it in small pieces rather than trying to do everything. I think, that sort of, that curve, I was talking to some people this morning, that curve at the bottom, the Big Bang one reminds me of a quote I think it's from Winston Churchill. I have to look it up before we started this thing. It says, we will never reach our destination if we stop and throw stone at every dog that barks. And in this Big Bang one, that seems to be the sort of behavior that alludes to, is that, everybody is not everybody's wanted to stop at every problem, examine it in great detail, throw stones at it and try and deal with it. You're trying to deal with people. There is no, you need to create, a pull. I think about social change, from me growing up. I never thought that people would, growing up in a place where everybody smoked, everything, everybody smoked everywhere, on the bus, in the cinema, etc., and that happened, at the football. And now when I go and watch the football, there is nobody that smokes in the ground. And that change has been because there's been this sort of incremental approach in this, and not that big bang. I can imagine if you try to introduce some of the social change I've seen in my life, going for a big bang approach would not have achieved the same rate of change as that sort of incremental approach. And that's socially, as well as politically, that lots of things that, that are now considered the norm. If you'd have waited for that sort of big bang approach and not created a demand for the change, we would still have been arguing about some of these things. So I think lots of this incremental change, we're changing all the time, is where we need to get to. I think this, sort of big bang approach, I've come to the conclusion the big bang approach just will not, deliver. I think it sucks a lot out of an organization. It makes you try and answer things that you can't really, answer at the point of starting. It makes you get answers that people may not like, so I think, having a clear place of where you're going, but being able to show the steps that you're going to get there, and the next steps are the most important ones, rather than what one might want to get to further down the line. Because who knows? When I came here, we didn't envisage we would get into anything like COVID.
Let me throw an example at you, Steve. I've seen both of them work. into some varying degree. Obviously, the big bang less than the incremental. So when you want to create a strategy, you might want to approach it in a big bang point of way. But then I always think if you're doing a big bang approach, you haven't got the organization right in terms of constant change, because we live in such a volatile world. And now is such a classic case. We've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, and before that there was the rapid adoption of technology, which continues. So we're always constantly changing and evolving. So why do we need such a shock with a big bang? Why can't organizations get into a mentality of continuous change? And that's always something that I've always thought about. How do you get organizations um, aligned to a change mentality? And it's a difficult one, because you really need to have a sense of purpose, and that sense of purpose needs to be really understood well. So what I've done is, and I'll get your views again, I've taken that graph and expanded it a little bit, and I created this. And I always think that we need to be careful when we go on big transformation initiatives. We need to be thinking about not forcing the pace of unlearning or the pace of learning. Because when we're going to change and transform, there's new ways of working, there's a new, people say we're going to create a new target operating model, this new future vision, which is always constantly changing anyway. What we do is we accelerate things so quickly that people can't quite grasp what they need to unlearn and learn, and they're forced into situations which they are comfortable. And what happens then, the barriers go up, therefore they become resistant, and secondly, they don't know what's coming. And we as leaders really need to be able to communicate to our workforce where we're going, how we're going about it, and the impact and the value, not to the individual in their role, but as an organization. And things that I've seen work is this graph on the right. You know, I've typically tried to, on that iterative change, focus on the key innovators. If you can grab the innovators who are quite scarce, and they can capture a small element of change and get early adopters, and they can get over this, crossing this chasm that I've described there. And what the majority, early and late majority, are looking for is that social proof. And once they get that social proof, you find then all the others will come on board, including maybe the laggards. And some cases, you're not going to get all the laggards on board. You're going to lose people on the way. Just your thoughts on that, Steve. Does that?
So my experience of you know the big bang ones is that there's a tendency to concentrate on the laggards.
Mhm.
There's a tendency to say you must bring everybody with us. There's a tendency to try and tie everything to that the speed of the slowest. I think it takes it out of these innovators and early adopters who want to get on, are constantly looking to improve. If all the discussion is about, what do we do with the people who don't want to move forward? I found that, in those change programs that I've been involved in, that have taken this sort of, we must do everything, and we're going to, close at 5 o'clock on a Friday and reopen on a Monday with a new organization, etc. They do have a tendency to not focus on the innovators and the early adopters. They have a tendency to focus on the laggards. Yeah. And that there's a lot of energy goes in there with people who won't do this, and there's a lot of, how do we persuade those? The best way of persuading those from me is to accelerate these first sections here, so less and less people think they can survive in this in that last, that 16% category you've got there. Yeah. So that's been my experience of change over many years in these different sort of scenarios that I've been involved in, is that the big bang approach just sort of lends itself to a concentration on those that won't, rather than trying to create momentum for those that will, and bringing people with you all the time. It's a push rather than a pull from people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had a comment from Paul Clements that's come in, who's saying that sometimes you need a combination of the two. If we're in a drastic situation for survival, maybe we need to do the big bang, and that could be right in that kind of scenario. But if the change has to happen, maybe I would say the success I've seen more is probably the agile iterative, that rather than the big bang, just from our experience. And we'll pick that up again, Paul, as we get into the Q&A section. I think it's time to get some audience participation, Steve. And we've created some polls, and we'd love to hear from the attendees. Which of those models do you think is relevant for their institution or organization? Do you think it's big bang, or is digital transformation going to be done in a big bang, or do you think it should be done in an incremental, agile way, or is it a combination of the two, or is it none of the above? What you can see there, ladies and gentlemen, is a little barcode. So on your laptop or your mobile, you can scan that barcode, and it will take you straight to slido.com. And there's a code there as well. The code number is 69387. And what we'd like you to do is vote for option 1, 2, 3, and 4. So
yeah, if you open up your camera on your phone and hold it straight over the barcode.
Yeah, and I'm just switching over to show everybody the live results as they come in for our survey. Oh, there, people are starting to vote. Great. Can you still hear me and see the screen, Harrison? Can you see the polls?
Yeah, everything's still there. I've seen 8 votes at the moment.
Yep. We'll give people some time to get to Slido with the barcode there, and please vote. Okay. We're up to 10. We'll give it just a few more seconds. And what it looks like is, and actually reflects Paul's comments, that people think there's a combination of the two, depending on the context of the organization, of the university. But there's quite a significant number of people also think the agile iterative way is the way to go forward. That's great. Steve, any thoughts from you on that?
No, I think that's what that's pretty much what we had last time as well, I think.
Yep, we certainly did. We'll go into another poll in a minute, but just going to flick back to the slides again. Bear with me as I do that. We're going to back to the slides. Harrison, just give me a nod that you can see the slides.
All good.
Yep. So second poll for our attendees. We've seen 3 types of organizations that have kind of emerging post the pandemic, and and we're still coming out of lockdown 3, or well, hopefully we will. Next week will be quite illuminating from Mr. Johnson. But there's 3 types of organizations we've seen. So we've seen the protector organization. This is the organization or institution, if you want to say that, are quite protective of their old ways of working, their old operating model. They're kind of a bit in denial. They're hoping everything snaps back. Colleagues and people will come back into the offices. Customers will stop phoning. And there's a lot of internal focus on cost cutting and lack of investment. And there's frantic revenue initiatives going on. And what they really are doing is failing to create a new norm and a new way of working that could be very agile for them. And that's the protector organization A. in the middle there is the frozen organization, who is neither A or C, and I'll describe to you C. And they just simply don't know what to do. And if if they haven't disappeared, they're more than likely to disappear really soon. And in the organization C, or installation C, is the one that's really galvanized. They've seen that there's a new world, or everybody says a new norm. We are going to be in a new norm. What that looks like is still forming. And they've accepted that things will be different, and they know they need to save the ship, they need to build back better, and they are engaging customers, communities, colleagues to rapidly change and build solutions that will meet their needs. Just a couple examples in the private sector. Marks and Spencers have created a transformation program called Never the Same Again. They did that in May 2020. The Co-op, for example, of building a new platform to connect with the community and local charities and to help and create new value. So what we'd like to do is ask you, again, stay with Slido, stay with the barcodes there again. Don't log out of Slido, because there's going to be this survey and one more coming. We'd like to ask you, which type of institution what type of institution is emerging for you, or you're likely to emerge? Is it going to be the A? Is it the B? Is it the C? Is it a combination of the A and the C, or none of the above? So again, we're going to go to the surveys, and let me just bring that up. Stop sharing surveys. Harrison, just let me know when you can see my screen with the surveys.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, still on the first one.
Second one. Here we
Now
go.
on the second one. There you go. The barcode could be scanned on there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really interesting. Yeah. Yes, the galvanized institution. Ooh. The galvanized and the protector. A is the protector. Yeah. And A and C, a combination of the protector and the galvanized. It's interesting. C, more of the C. That's really great. We had at least 10 on the last poll, so I think we'd love to get a couple of more views. Oh, okay. Here we go. I'll give it another 10 seconds for. Is there anybody else that would like to contribute? That'd be great. Oh, well, okay. Oh, here we are. So, Steve, what's your thoughts on this? We've got, remember, type A is the one that's very protective of the new old ways of working, whereas type C is the one that's galvanized and understands there's a new norm coming and needs to change. And obviously, we haven't had any of the type B, which is really great. Any thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, so I think that, the successful organizations obviously are going to be the type that are galvanized, that are looking at opportunities about what this is going to give us. And I think, that sort of forward looking and looking for opportunities around that is just going to be so important. Not just, I think that this is the new normal now. That's my view of it.
Yep. Thank you everybody for that. There's one more poll to come. I'm going to now switch back to the slides and carry on with the presentation. Okay, so if you think about what we've gone through, we set some context around HE. We've been talking about change, types of organizations emerging, the big bang, the incremental. So what I thought we'd do is we just put together some thoughts around the types of change traits that we need to consider as we go forward. So what we're seeing from many of your answers is it's the A or C, the galvanized organization in many ways. And so what does that galvanized organization, what are those traits? And I've typically seen these. One, there's a mentality around continuous change. So managing versus enabling. So enabling that change. Second trait I've seen is there's never an end state. Don't always try to aim for perfection, because the end state will continually change and evolve. Uh, and don't try to aim for perfection. I think a third change trait is always thinking about delegating authority. So being clear on outcomes and empowering delivery. And this is around, if you have experts in your organization, give them the authority and the power to go and make things happen. Obviously, there's a level of governance and management around that, but if you're empowering them with delivery, they take accountability and responsibility. And that's a very important change trait. Always, it's so important to have a platform. The burning platform has been COVID-19, but I think we always in organizations need to know what that burning platform is always, and maybe driving for that sense of purpose is so important. So but having a common purpose and being purpose driven and linking it to the strategy and the vision going forward. And that covers 4 and 5. Item 6 is thinking about outcomes and not silos. And what that means is collaborating, co-creating, sharing and designing. So people are bought into projects, programs, portfolios, change activities, and they're focused not on what the org structure looks like and this department and that department, more around coalescing and working collectively on achieving outcomes. And second, the seventh trait is really around being able to coach and leadership through coaching rather than micromanaging, so that you're shifting from an expert guidance to an helper. And finally, involving stakeholders. Successful change of needs involvement stakeholders, top to bottom. So of those 6 traits, and I just leave them there, because what we're going to do is we're going to ask you again for another poll. We're going to ask you, of those 8 traits in your institution, or if you're a consultant in the organizations that you work with or for, what are the top 3 traits do you think we need to focus in on higher than the others going forward? So back to Slido. And we'll stop, and we're going to go back to Slido and do our final survey. So could you please rank, sorry, go ahead, go Harrison.
No, I'm just going to say, I've just having a cough. It's on the third one now as well.
Yeah, it's like, can you please rank the change traits from 1 to 8 in all important? So just pick your top 3, please. Pick your top 3. There's 8 there. So we know you might need a little bit more time to read this one. So we'll give you a little bit more time. So I'll just scroll down so everybody can see them. I know there's more than 5, so continue to vote, please. Thank you. We'll give you a bit more time. Mhm. Okay, a couple of more votes would be appreciated if they're out. If you're out there and you, oh, there we go, win there. Oh well, that's
There you go.
interesting. That's really great. We got top three. We do have top three. Again, Steve, I'll let your thoughts on it. The top three that have come out is there's never an end destination, so we need to continue to evolve. Need to collaborate around outcomes rather than structures and silos and governance. Managers should shift from giving instructions to defining outcomes and developing teams.
Yeah, so
Steve, your thoughts?
that managers should shift from giving instructions. I think that's part of the the whole evolution that people have been through around from my perspective of managers thinking their role was to make sure that people were doing what they were supposed to be doing at a certain time of day and constantly monitoring what they're doing to divining outcomes and trusting people to get on and do that and invest in teams. I'm so passionate about investing in teams. Some of the funding regimes that I've worked in have worked against funding teams and have tended to fund projects. I don't think that's the right way to go. It's all about developing teams who can respond to that end, the destination. It constantly evolves, and if we've learned anything over this last year, that has got to be something that people have got to see as being true. And collaboration is something that I think we're getting better at. If I cast my mind back to the collaboration used to be you'd write something, and collaboration was you'd share it to people, and then they may make some changes to it. Working together to create something, especially in a sort of creative environment, is really sort of enjoyable and a good thing to do, but it does require a different mindset. Collaboration is not about you going away and doing something and presenting it to people and saying, what do you think about this? It's working together to achieve an outcome. And we've got a long way. I think we've got a long way to go in the current thing that I am currently dealing with to actually make sure that's embedded in.
Yeah. So just on that one, Steve, if you think about what happened last April, May, and March, April, when we had to shift or pivot, everybody talks about pivoting. There wasn't the COVID-19 and the impact was. It's not something that you have to do. You want to do. It's you have to do. And people, I've spoken to many people around. Well, what did you do? They said we didn't have a plan. And what we did is we just got together. We had to work together to get to do stuff. We need to get new licenses, or we need to get more computing power, or we need to get more software. We had to get laptops reconfigured. We just did stuff, and we knew who had the skills to help us, and they coalesced or collaborated. And I think for me, that was a great, not revelation, but a great learning from about change, making change happen in a quick and agile way.
I think also those sort of, these big things that come and hit us also cause organizations to think about prioritization. And I think that also helped in collaboration and in managers trusting people to get on with it, because you've really got to respond quickly. And if people are clear about what the organization should be doing and gets a plan to do that, I noticed that was one of the key issues that accelerated what we were doing in the I team in Cambridge, was people being clear about what they wanted. certainly, you know, in the early stages of this thing, people were clear about what they needed us to deliver.
Okay, that's great. So I'll stop. First, I just want to thank everybody for providing their answers and the inputs. This is great because what it allows us to do, maybe for future webinars, is to focus on those top 3 things. Yeah. Let me share with you. I'm gonna switch back to my slides because I want to share with you. I ran this poll, this exact poll, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and these are the results from that poll 3 weeks ago. And I'm just reflecting on what we've seen on today's poll compared to the poll that I did 3 weeks ago, and totally different audience. And they said collaborate around outcomes, not silos, which you guys did. Shift to, managers rather shifting to, helping and guiding. The only slight differences were on the stakeholders. The stakeholders came out stronger for them, whereas you guys are talking about collaboration and teams and so forth. But some good, real strong overlap and how people feel about this kind of stuff around change. So thank you for that. As we get into the final latter parts of our presentation, and we're still good for time, it's about 5:10. We've got 20 minutes. We're going to just share with you a couple of frameworks and some final thoughts before we open it for Q&A. So what I thought I'd just quickly run through with you and leave this as a framework for people to think about is change is a constant. It's a new norm. Before COVID, it was the rapid adoption of technology, market forces, digital, IoT, machine learning, AI, all that stuff is still here. Now we've got to deal with another market force, a pandemic. So a culture of having constant change mentality, I think, is important. Understanding your sector, your market, understanding the context of your organization, your purpose, and that then can drive the rational, emotional purpose for change in your organization, and then feeding that into your formal and informal mechanisms in your organization. Change management as a practice focus on the formal mechanisms, but there are many, many informal mechanisms in an organization and teams and groups. We need to understand how they feel about change and understanding how they can relate to the purpose and the vision and the strategy. It's so important. And let employees drive change. Get the commitment from the top. That's what leadership are here for. But involve those leaders in that change, empower employees with the decision making, and ensure that you have those mechanisms that allow you to constantly evolve and adapt according to change or those market forces or internal forces, and that brings, you need stability to get agility. I think you need to be stable before you can become agile, and you need to constantly communicate. Steve, this one's for you. That's my framework. You've got a little framework here that you wanted to just talk about as well.
Yeah, so this is about trying to, about trying to talk about holistic approach to, change, and how people look at it. There's 5 areas to think about, and these are the levers that you need to, I think, be really clear about. One is technology. The second is people, process, ways of working. We just talked about how really important that is. And then constant feedback on one that's really quite often forgotten about is the insight and analytics. So how well are you doing? How are you measuring how well are you doing is a really sort of easily forgotten piece of this. And I find with those 5 things, looking at those, if you think about those as a dashboard and what you want to do with it, that gives you, a really good chance of being successful.
Mhm. And I was going to say, just to reinforce those messages, the only bit I would add is the insights. You need the data to give you those insights. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has given us is if you don't have technology and systems in place to capture data, how can you get insight? And I think data, business intelligence and getting insight from data has become a real important driver for business change. And I think new technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning will really help us with predicting what outcomes could be, with their challenges at the same time. So, final thoughts, Steve. I put in a nice detailed slide, and I've just wanted to put this out because this kind of shows the kind of corporate, or I should say, the holistic view of a university. And that's why I want to put this slide together. And it kind of thinks about, academic performance to curriculum design, student experience, professional services, IT, procurement, commercial, governance, operating model, leadership, culture, all underpinning the corporate strategy. And what are your thoughts for the future of HE and what institutions could look like? What are your thoughts?
So I think all of those need to be part of the COVID, recovery plan. I think people need, as they go forward, work out about what their interaction with those things are. I think there's a danger that as you go into this, that you put some of those, if you think about those 5 areas as like muscles, that some of them get overdeveloped at the expense of other muscles with that. So I think you've got to think about the whole thing as a whole, and you constantly need to be looking at how those 5 areas are working together and making sure that you don't end up with a procurement and commercial optimization model that has caused unintended consequences for the academic performance and the curriculum design. And so that's the key bit for me now to look at as we go forward, is how you bring those together, and develop them at the rate so they operate all together, and you don't get the thing that I've seen previously in these things, where you get a rather overdeveloped muscle for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm. I think thank you for that, Steve. I think my thoughts are COVID-19 has given us an opportunity. Whilst it's all its pitfalls and challenges that we're faced with it's driven organizations to work in different ways. And HE has been, has been impacted significantly in terms of teaching and learning, and providing academic services from admissions right the way across the student life cycle and into research activities. It's a time for, or maybe it's a watershed time for the modernization of universities to use IT and technology in a digital way. And that's why I'm quite passionate about how we can develop universities for 2030 and institutions, what they look like for digital transformation. And my parting thought is, please have those grand visions and strategies, but do it in a way that you take people, every say taking people on the journey with you. Do it in a very collaborative, stakeholder way, in an incremental, agile way. If you are in a context where you need to do something drastic, you might go for a big bang approach. But I think incremental change in a world that's evolving all the time and changing, and we're having to adapt and be agile is the way forward from my experiences. So that's my final thoughts. Let's embrace digital transformation and make that change happen for our students and our learners of the future. who are our future, really. Okay.
Fantastic.
I was just going to say there is our contact details with some lovely mugshots. So Harrison there's Harrison, there's Steve, and there's myself. Please reach out to us. Please contact us as you see fit. And what we'll do is switch over to this is part of the Q&A session now. Harrison, do you?
Yeah, so I've seen we've got one of Paul's from earlier, which was relating back to the digital transformation slide. I know you mentioned you wanted to kind of touch on it again at the end, if it's something you wanted to go back over. And if anybody else had any kind of statements to add forward, feel free to put them in the chat box.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves, and actually you can. I will also allow you to start your video if you want to, your camera, so you can unmute yourself if you have a comment or you want to share something or you have a question. Or we can ask Paul to give us his thoughts.
I mean, if I've got a question, if not as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to ask in terms of the collaboration. I know we mentioned it before. Oh, Paul's back as well. Hello, Paul.
Ooh.
You go ahead, Harrison.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say, yeah, if I was going to ask in terms of the collaboration of, kind of the best maybe practices and examples around this. Obviously, with everybody remote working at the moment, it may be quite hard. And you mentioned not forming structures around this. So would you have any examples or approaches for this as well?
Yeah, and I think it touches on, from my perspective here, is that we need to we need, as we change and transform, we need to provide areas or safe areas where teams can work. So there's one about collaborating and working together and designing and co-creating. But we also, and I've seen this in a couple of organizations as I've been talking to some change managers, what they're doing is creating times in the day, it be at lunchtime or towards the end of the day, where people can come along and just talk and share their experiences of what's going on in the organization and reconnect with people. So there's that reconnection and being part of a team or part of the culture. But that's an informal networks, but some of there's formal stuff as well. So leaders need to be communicating what's the purpose of the organization, where we're going, what we're trying to achieve, and that collaboration, and not forcing, but sharing that the need for collaboration being supportive from a leadership perspective. I'm not sure if Steve's got any thoughts and views.
No, I wouldn't. I'd agree with you there, Paul. I think that is the important thing.
Perfect. I saw Paul's come on now as well.
Yep. Paul, I can unmute you.
It's all right. I've done it. I can use the technology.
Yay. Well, thank you, Paul. Nice to meet you, by the way.
And you. Yeah. So what I was hearing at the time you were having that discussion was that it was an either or conversation rather than actually sometimes the approach will change depending on the context, but depending on where you are in the life cycle as well. So for instance, if you're faced with significant loss of revenue, it is about survival. If you're hemorrhaging money, if you're hemorrhaging students, it is about, or any other example you can think of, it is about how do we quickly stop this, correct the ship so we don't keep taking on water, and then we have the headspace and the opportunity with preserved capital to be able to then make some informed choices. So all of that other good stuff comes into play about, how do we then do things much more collaboratively. So the leadership style also changes from one of being more directive to be one of more inclusive. That's all.
No, and it's a very valid point, and that's why we gave both perspectives. And I've been through a significant transformation where it was big bang, and it was successful in the end, but it took longer. and I think the benefits, the morale of staff got better with time, but we lost people on the way. And then I've been, over the last 5-10 years, I've been doing more of the kind of iterative agile way, and I found that you can take people with you. It's easier to take people with you on that kind of journey, and it's a you're constantly evolving. So I absolutely hear you. If you're hemorrhaging, you need to do something drastic, and maybe that's a bit of a start off with a big bang before you go into the agile, inclusive approach. So absolutely agree. Where are you from, Paul, by the way, just out of interest?
I've just finished some time with London Business School.
Oh.
So we had the global, so without being too indiscreet, we had the global students, and suddenly all of those things were taken away from us. So our business model was severely challenged, and we had to put things online immediately. So there was no plan B. It was just survival.
Yep.
And funnily enough, I see that Stephen was on as well, who took over from me. So okay. I'm sure it would resonate with him if he was still there.
But when you were doing that, I mean, I presume you responded to that in an agile way. You had to what Kuldip was referring to before. You were forced to, take decisions quickly and act quickly. And I was trying to describe something where there's been, this has been a long time gestation period of a big transformation plan, and then that is a long, gestation period of actually achieving it. So I think, that what you're describing probably required you to be more agile in the way you were doing it, responding to that sort of loss of international students, etc.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Apart from the fact of using the word agile, if I use coming from an IT background and being a CIO for quite a while, if I use the word agile, then everybody gets giddy about agile development, and then that's the only way to do things. But actually, in a crisis situation, you find that instead of just building deck chairs, let's get off the Titanic and let's do something different. And so any other word apart from agile is one that I would use.
Yeah,
that's a personal preference.
I agree with that, but yeah, I suppose that some words get no, I agree. That is a problem with that choice of that word agile, that it conjures up.
Because people automatically think about Kanban or SAFe or Scrum techniques in developing software, but there's an agile in the small a, and there's agile in the big A, which is slightly different meaning. But Paul, you raise a great point. And you didn't have a plan, did you? You just had to do some stuff, and we knew generally what you had to do, and just get on with it, right?
Some of the other places I've worked are like hospitals, and if you think of you're going into A&E and you're pumping blood out onto the floor, you don't just think, oh, what's our plan here? It's stop the bloody blood coming out,
exactly.
Right? So you've got to do some things. And all of that training says that let's really focus on the priorities here, and only once we've stopped the blood can we then really assess. So it is that sort of approach.
Well, I'm just going to mention there's another question here from Neil King. Can you see that at all?
No, Neil. Hello, Neil. I haven't spoken to you for a long time.
Can you see it, or do you want me to read that out?
Yeah, go for it.
So it's from Neil King. The biggest challenge I've experienced in HEIs is that a lot of our decision making and governance structures are designed to protect our history, reputations, and are purposely designed to stop us taking decisions to make major changes. COVID forced institutions to act. Any thoughts about how we keep our institutions receptive to change?
Yes. Steve, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think that that is going to be one of the, it's going to be one of the thing that COVID gives, is that organizations like that really take on board the fact that we've got to behave in in a more agile way, and protecting what we have is no good. So that wouldn't have stopped, what Paul was just talking about, or what the university was faced with. Continuing to adopt those styles will not get it. It will lead to it being severely impaired, if not at all, completely dysfunctional.
And I think the danger is slipping back to the old ways and the old governance structures. And this is the way that we used to do it before. So maintaining purpose. So if COVID-19 was the burning platform, we need to continue to have a burning platform for change, because if you don't change, or you don't evolve, you will become stale. I've seen this in many organizations, that gap between, say, the adoption of technology compared to how much change you can absorb, that gap just gets bigger and bigger, and then they bring in a bunch of consultants to try to solve the problem. So if an organization can maintain its learning, its purpose, and its understand what its burning platforms are, and galvanize the organization, empower them to keep on evolving, that would be absolutely awesome. We can't go back to the old ways of working, and it's a challenge. You're absolutely right, Neil. A lot of the institutions I've worked in, it's command, not, I wasn't going to say command and control, but it's like, this is what we're doing. You have to send everything up. The decision gets made at the top, then it comes back down, and that could take a long time to get things moving. Sometimes we need to devolve some of that power and to the people on the ground who know what they're doing, right? And that's different, and that is a different mindset. That really is a different mindset, and that's a difference between, I see, in between a leader and maybe a manager. A leader can say, I know and I trust that team to deliver against our purpose and our goals and objectives and outcomes, and let them make it happen. As long as they understand the parameters that we're working in, there's always going to be some level of governance, but we need to maintain that drive for change. I just echo your thoughts, Neil. It's just how maintaining it.
Yeah, I don't think it's unique to HEIs either. I think if you look at the high street, look at the names that have gone under. They're the big old organisations that to them, protecting what they've had in the past is more important than forward. And they've gone now. They've disappeared. And I fear similarly for HEIs, if we don't adopt an attitude that actually, yes, we've had a good history, but if we're not willing to consider how we change and move forward, then we could end up going the same way as
which is why I was saying now is the time. We've seen change happen or forced on us from COVID-19. Let's continue that forward. Sorry, Neil, you were saying it. Okay.
No, just agreeing, Kuldip. Yeah.
Any other questions, Harrison?
No, nothing else in the chat box at the moment. I don't know if anybody else wanted to include anything or come off and mention anything at all.
It is 5:30.
Good on time.
Yeah, we're up bang on time. As I said, there's our contact details. Love to get your feedback. And you chase us up. The only thing I would like to say is just thank you for your time. Thank you for your inputs on the poll. Thank you for coming and listening to us and taking the time out of your busy schedules. And any final thoughts from Steve or yourself, Harrison?
No, good. Just to echo that. Thank you, everybody, obviously, for coming along. Definitely great with the interaction side, everybody getting involved as well, and the questions at the end from Paul and Neil. Thank you. And thanks to yourself, Kuldip, and Steve as well.
Oh, thank you. It's very humbling that people want to listen to our guests.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, got some comments at the bottom, everybody, from Gregory and Gail as well. Thank you for an interesting discussion. Perfect.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring the webinar to a close and thank everybody again. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Take care.